Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. In this video, I'm going to talk about one of the very important topic, which is moreover related to the applications where we as an IT pro, as well as there are different requirements which comes to the IT team or majorly or especially for those people who are working on IAM side or identity access management side, right? And this is going to be in context of Microsoft Entra ID or Azure context, basically, right? Where we would have to register an applications as well as we have to do different activities like registering an application, then spin up the single sign-on. Along with that, we have to register or create certificates and client secrets, right? Along with that, we would also have to put an authentication methods, including redirect URIs, and if there are any flows that we need to add, be it ID token or refresh tokens or whatever it is, right? Now that is one thing which is going to be set up with the application, but at the same time, there would be an very key important area where we need to decide what level of permissions we are going to grant to that respective application in order to perform certain actions on behalf of user identities, right? And how people should be able to either use single sign-on to authenticate themselves to the respective applications, and if not, then what are those permissions which we are going to provide to that application, and how would you determine those are the least privileged permissions, right? Because we don't want that applications to be given with the highly privileged permissions or over privileged permissions, right? Because those are the things where we wanted to prevent and stop by, right? And also we wanted to make sure the respective application should have only the permissions which it needs to be able to perform its respective activities or actions, right? Be it on behalf of users or be it on the authentications or kind of user has to log in on every time. So there are two types or two contexts. One is going to be on the user context and one is going to be either application context. And majorly you would see the application context is being used heavily and across different scenarios and use cases, right? And that is what I'm going to show you how you would go ahead and determine which permission is going to be the least privileged permissions so that you are not going to share over permissions or over privileged permissions along with the high one, right? And that is what it is going to help, right? So let's talk about those options. What are those options and how you can use which one, right? So you can use both of those options, but definitely the second option which I'm going to talk about, it needs something or some other requirements that needs to be installed locally, right, on the device, and then you need to run some of the code to test that whether this permission is a least privileged permissions or is going to be a high or maybe more than higher permissions, which is going to be the over privileged permission, right? And the other method, which is going to be first one, that's going to be simply straightforward, where you can simply go ahead and log into the portal and access and see that, right? So the portal is going to show you itself that this permission is going to be the least one. But if you have requirement to go beyond that least privilege permission, that means there is a need to use that second method, which is going to be providing that one, right? So let's talk about both of these, and I'm going to show you more demo on the first method, right? And show you how we can determine and how we can verify and see. And the second method, I'll talk about bit of it, but I'm not going to cover demo on the second method because it has or it needs some of the steps that needs to take from the scratch to install that locally, and then it's going to take a lot of time, right? So I'll cover that in another video separately. All right. So before starting, I would expect and I would like you to like this video, share it with your friend, people around you, and subscribe to the channel as well so that you get to see every new video. All right. So let's jump onto the topic. Okay. So let me share my screen quickly here, and I will simply show you, or we can jump on to the topic, right? So you can see that I am on the Graph Explorer portal, right? And what I wanted to show you is the first topic. or the first method, right? And there are two methods, as I said, right? So the first method is using Microsoft Graph or Graph Explorer portal, where you would need to log in with your appropriate admin credentials. Now I have logged in with my Hotmail account, so I'll just switch it to the my uh, Entra account, and then we would be able to perform and validate all of that stuff, right? So let's see. Perfect. It seems it is logged in. Perfect. And the second method is all about, I think I have that one. Let me reshare the screen again. And I will simply show you in another page. All right, let me bring that screen share here. And these are only the two options, but the first option is going to be something which I am going to show you by going through the graphics portal, right? Okay. So first option is using MS Graph Explorer, right? And the second one is using Dev proxy, but it would need additional setup locally that we are, or we need to do that, so that by installing Dev proxy module locally, and then it needs a bit of local installation. And once that is done, you would be able to go ahead and do that, right? But for now, I'm going to go with the first one and the second one, right? So the first one is pretty straightforward. Using Graph Explorer, we would be able to simply go through it with the right set of administrator permissions. And whenever you wanted to use any of the permissions or any of the actions for different requirements or different use cases, you would be simply be able to go ahead and find it, right? Okay, so let's jump on to the Graph Explorer portal, right? Now you can see that as soon as we are here on this page, and if I run this one, it should, it's a post. I just need to set it to get and run this query. So it has given me this details. Now, why it has pulled out this detail? Because it has some of the permissions granted, and that is why it has pulled out details about me, right? And how would you check that? So to check that one, you need to click on this modify permissions over here, and all of those permissions would show up over here, right? Now you can see many or maximum of those permissions are already consented, and consent is granted. That means whatever the details, if I try to fetch about user, then directory across the read whole directory, read write whole directory, then user read all, user basics, read write on user, read write all on all users, right? You can see all of those consent types are already granted. That means I would have a lot of permissions, right? Now I wanted to go back and see what are the other permissions which I can add with least privilege permissions, and how would I determine this specific permissions is the least privilege permission, because I don't want it to go with the high one, and I also don't want to put my application, or maybe it's a kind of service account or service principal that we are going to use, it might be put into risks, right? That is why we don't want it to bring or put it with the high permissions or high over privileged permissions, right? So let's check that one. You can see that there are different permissions under this permissions column, and you would see the icon here over here, right? A small information icon which says, if you hover the mouse, it shows that this is the least privileged permissions in the list, right? So in this whole list, this is the least privileged permissions. It's only the read permissions. It's not going to allow any read write operations on the user's context. Similarly, there are different applications and different requirements. You can see at the left panel over here, you would see all the different areas where we would have different uh, use cases or different requirements. For example, alerts. If I click on this one, and for that, I would need to provide different permissions. Again, for the same alerts or same requirement, I would have the list previous permissions, right? So wherever you would see I as an informational icon, and if you hover this mic or icon or keyboard or the mouse over here, right, you would be able to see it is going to show this is the list previous permissions in the list, right? Now you got to know how we can identify, right? Now let's jump onto the other method where you would also see the similar permissions and dig dive onto it, right? So you need to click on top right corner where your identity is showing up, right? And then click on consent to permissions. And you would see a whole lot of permissions over here. In this list, it has numerous. If you have to count, then probably you would have to count one by one, or if you would be able to get the PowerShell script, you can simply filter out and get it. Now you would see there is a search button. You can simply search. If I have to search some of the permissions related to group, I can simply search as a group and then it is going to list out all of those. Similarly, if I wanted to filter it out with different filters, including all permissions, consented permissions only, or unconsented. So I'll go with the consented one and let's see how many permissions I have consented so far, right? So you can see that I have these many permissions which are already consented on the different requirements that I have tried and used so far, right? And similarly, you would see which permission is consented, whether with least privileged permissions or including high or over high permissions as well, right? So under applications, I have this one, which is already consented. You can see consent status is grayed out, right? And if you click or hover on it, it says you required directory this and this to be able to revoke consent to the permissions, right? Now, there is another way as well when you wanted to revoke or remove the permissions from the applications or service principals or daemons, right? So you can do that from the Entra portal as well by going into the respective applications and get into the permissions tab. And from there, you would be able to just revoke the permissions and delete that as well. So that's going to be part of offboarding of that respective applications, and you don't have to keep that respective applications up and using in the system, even using as an if it stays there and you are not using actively, that probably might bring in security risk to the tenant and to the system altogether, right? And that is why we have to make sure we are not putting the systems in risks at all. We need to make sure we are revoking appropriate permissions, and it starts from the day one or starts from the permissions assignment, right? And that's what I'm showing here, how you can eliminate and determine what is the least privilege permission so that you can assign only those which are needed and not the higher or over privileged permissions at all, right? So now we can filter it out this way and would be able to identify which is needed, what is not needed, and then depending on that, you would be able to do the same, right? So now there are other ways as well, right? And it totally depends on each organization, how each organization is following the practice in order to provide the right set of permissions to the different applications, right? And basis on that, they would go ahead and test all those permissions by registering the applications and perform the different applications or actions. And that really happens with in collaboration with the developer team and the Entra ID or IAM team who actually creates the applications, then provides the permissions to application, and then they do the different tests of that code or whatever the code that they have written in, right? And now these permissions are majorly being provided to both scenarios. Both scenario, the first scenario could be the application that is being developed in-house within the company, and they wanted to make sure the application has appropriate permissions in order to provide required access permissions and access levels, right? And that way it is going to be provided and easy to give them the appropriate access at all, right? And the second scenario is with enterprise applications, right? So enterprise applications are those applications which would come up with certain permissions that they need, right? And even those are applications where we can simply provide if in case they need additional along with least privilege permissions as well as higher or over higher permissions as well. So we have to follow the same practice in order to make sure we are going to provide appropriate permissions and get it done, right? So this way we would be able to go ahead and provide the appropriate permissions and get the permissions assigned so that the applications and system which is available and wanted to provide, then that is going to work for the requirement, right? All right. So we saw the first method where we would be able to identify and determine what is the least privilege permission and then assign it to the respective applications and provide it, right? So similarly, you would be able to test all those API calls over here as well. For example, if I have to pull out something, probably I'll just click on Outlook mail and probably this one, right? If I click on it and run it, then it should give me the results, right? You can see that it has pulled out the results or details about the email which are high important mails in my mailbox, right? Now how it had pulled it, it had pulled because of these permissions which are already granted, right? And you can see that I have given this permission with mail.read and mail.readWrite because I was trying to send an email as well using this Graph Explorer, and that is why I had given the rewrite permission over here. And you can also see there's a basic or least privilege permissions, which is this one, mail.read basic, right? And if that is the minimum permission that is needed for your use case or requirement, you would be able to do that simply by clicking this consent button, and it's going to show something like this one is going to ask for authentication, and you would just need to accept it. Also, you would see this type would like to access and read user basic email address, basic profile details, and maintain access to data you have given it access to, right? And this checkbox, which is over here, which says and talks about consent on behalf of your organization, right? If you click on this checkbox and click on accept button, that means it's going to provide the same consent of on behalf of your organization across the whole organization for all the users, right? So you need to make sure you are granting consent only to the respective application or identities and not for the whole organization, because you never know what's going to happen, because user might try to access any of those third party applications which are a part of shadow IT or SaaS based applications to use freebies or free kind of services across, right? Because there are so many applications available in the market and those might lead into security incidents, right? So definitely that's something is really needed here and to understand about this one. So let's go ahead and accept one. And now it is accepted. It is going to be showing as consented. You can see it is going to show consent type. And once that is done, it should be good to go, right? So yeah, that is how it is going to be. And that's what I wanted to show you and talk about. And definitely I'm going to make video on second topic as well. And I'll show you from the scratch how it should set up and how should we test and everything together, right? So yeah, that's all for this video. Hope you like it, learn it, and don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel as well. And yep, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.